Hi, I'm Wendy Meyerson. As I grew up in Central New York, I was fortunate to watch my grandfather, Abraham Meyerson, and my father, Stan Meyerson, operate as local pharmacists for more than 30 years. I witnessed each of these men become a part of their customers' lives, and this had a huge impact on me. Many years later, people still tell me about the night my father opened Drummond's Pharmacy in the middle of the night to fill a prescription for their sick child. While times have certainly changed, I understand that you, as a customer, had the opportunity to purchase many of our products down the street, on the internet, or just about anywhere. What Natur-Tyme strives to offer is that same customer service experience provided by my family over so many years to the Central New York community. At Natur-Tyme, we remain dedicated to our customers and are willing to offer you and your family ongoing education and information to empower your own health and wellness. Natur-Tyme is creating a healthier community, starting with you. This is Karen Fisk. Karen has been with the Natur-Tyme family, but I've got to go back and say the Drummond's Pharmacy family, the Drummond's Health Shop family, to the Natur-Tyme family. So you predate me. In case people don't know, I'm Wendy Meyerson, and I'm the owner of Natur-Tyme, and the daughter of Stan Meyerson and the granddaughter of Al Meyerson, who, of course, you worked with for many years before I even thought about coming back to Syracuse.
I knew Stan for quite a few years. He was really ahead of his time.
No question. So let's start. Karen is a wellness educator at Natur-Tyme. But when you first started, it was in Drummond's Pharmacy.
Yes, I was stocking shelves, running registers, picking up bagels for the Sunday customers who bought the Sunday paper.
So then you remember my grandpa Slide, who used to put all those Sunday, the Herald Journal together. He used to have to put them all the pieces.
We had a little bit of overlap. Yes. Yes.
So what made you walk into Drummond's Pharmacy to even start working there?
When it came to driving, I was a late bloomer, and it was a half a mile from my house. So it was an easy hike, and I shopped there, and would glare at me over the candy counter to make sure I didn't take any bazooka. So it was just part of my neighborhood.
So how long did you work in the Drummond's Pharmacy, the atmosphere, before it kind of started evolving? I mean, my recollection, living in Houston and coming back and visiting, my father found some interest in nutritional supplements. This was back in the 80s.
Yes.
Basically from some of his own health concerns. Colon cancer ran in the family, some other health issues, and he just started investigating and looking into supplements for his own personal use. Then he began a relationship with Dr. Sherry Rogers. So where were you in all of that?
I came in '87, so I didn't really take part in the redevelopment of the store into, there was a little aisle of supplements initially, and that was all Stan. And I wasn't terribly well versed in the supplements right away.
Who was? I
Stan.
mean, really?
Yeah.
Well,
Stan.
who was? But
That's
even the
what
customers back then, were they even looking for that or asking about it?
Sometimes, yes. A lot of folks just sort of cruise past that aisle, so he moved it around a little bit and encouraged conversation. Stan used to encourage us to play the game, he referred to it as, and I took it as something different. It was basically to generate interest, talk about the supplements, but to me, the supplements had a fascination anyway. I'd rather work with the body, and nutritional deficiencies are a very real thing.
I mean, if you think about back in the 80s, and even into the 90s, the surge of not nutritional supplements, but pharmaceuticals was just becoming
Fast and furious.
Fast and furious, a good way to put it. I mean, look where we are today. If you ask a person, how their health is, and they'll say, "Oh, I'm great," and then they'll list 6 medications that they're on to control their blood pressure, the cholesterol, their weight, their blood sugar, and they perceive themselves as being healthy. But back in the 80s, it was just kind of compounding was stopping, and the mass production of pharmaceuticals, and you were more entrenched in it than I was happening.
And back in the 70s, I think we were granola eating Birkenstock wearers.
Right.
And then in the 80s, it was almost, we were made mockery of for a time. But people started to catch on that it was possible to do better and not necessarily have to take a prescription for the rest of their lives. there are other ways to feed the body, because it's not always just a symptom or a signal from the body. Very often the quality of life is diminished to the point where something needs to be done. And those are our customers.
Well, I think my father had that vision and understood that, again, just out of his own personal health and his knowledge, about pharmaceuticals. He was able to make those connections the opposite way, which was interesting. So you said you remember the aisles, and I do recall that a little bit, where he had some nutritional supplements in the pharmacy, which was, very unheard of for somebody growing up today. You walk into any of the chains, and sometimes they even have stores within stores. You'll have a supplement company inside there with a little kiosk or mini aisle. So it's not uncommon, but back in the 80s, that was very unusual.
It was rather rare. I can remember walking up Nottingham Road to Carl's Drugs and Faye's Drugs, and they did not have that going on.
Right.
Plus, your dad gave Drumlins a personal touch. He made connections with his customers. Everybody knew who he was, or would soon know who he was.
He definitely had a personality.
Oh, yeah, and he was very, very knowledgeable and very insightful. Passionate, yes. And his relationship with Dr. Rogers, just that they fed one another. Very few people, I suspect, don't know who Dr. Rogers is, but she really caught a lot of heat for working with nutrition over pharmacology, and the AMA was not too pleased with her. But she was also ahead of her time, and is ahead of her time.
I mean, as you know, and as we deal with customers every day, when you have a need or something happens to you and it becomes personal, the whole dynamic changes. And for Dr. Rogers, her health deteriorated. She had all kinds of issues, which was the catalyst, as I was mentioning, my father kind of looking into nutritional supplements with the familial health issues and the genetics that were going on, caused him to that spark. And that's what happens with a lot of people. And that's, what happened with Dr. Rogers. So I remember the pharmacy having some supplements, and then all of a sudden, living in Houston, having my kids, Drummond's Health Shop popped up.
Yes.
Was it always Drummond's Health Shop over there, or he made it Drummond's Health Shop?
He made it Drummond's Health Shop.
Okay, so was it vacant space, or there was something in there before?
I don't recall what was there before, but when he opened up that space, I was not one of the few people, or first people to work there.
Okay.
I stayed at a pharmacy at that point. I was counting pills and checking for prescription conflicts, something that I still have
To do today.
Yes.
How'd you do that then? What resources did you have? Like big volume books?
That too, but each big bottle that you counted from had this thing that you would unfold and unfold and unfold. And it was just ended up being a map. And very, very fond of everything that had been discovered about that particular prescription. So if there was a conflict with another prescription or food, it would be printed in the literature. And I used to eat those for supper.
Oh my God, how labor intensive must that have been, and how many opportunities for errors, especially people weren't taking nutritional supplements like they do today. So maybe the conflicts were a lot less, but
well, also most people have more than one doctor. A lot of people have more than one doctor, and one doctor doesn't necessarily know what a doctor is prescribing.
well, there's no electronic communications back then. Yeah.
So it was an opportunity to provide a service again, and to make sure that no conflicts arose. And I remember when they sent out a questionnaire, and one of the questions on it was, what is the most trusted occupation? And it was pharmacist. And I think that's because they were the middleman between or amongst a bunch of doctors potentially. So.
Well, and they were connected to their community. The world has changed so much now, but they were, people still stop me today, 50 years later, as kids, and say, I remember your dad, I was sick, and my mom went and called him, and he opened the pharmacy in the middle of the night to get my prescription. I mean, people still do that today. Obviously the generations, the time and the age has gone on, but so how did you transition over to Drummond's Health Shop?
There was a need, and I enjoyed it. So yeah, I was already sort of brushing up on the nutritional aspect of things, and sort of.
Did you approach him, or did he approach you?
He approached me, and we did have a little pop quiz session where he'd ask me things and I would respond
And he'd be like, oh,
correctly,
wow.
incorrectly, depending on the day, depending on the question. So yeah, he needed someone else over there, so I went over there.
Because I mean, to think that he found people who could work over there at that time that had the knowledge of supplements.
I
You
didn't
know,
have that much yet, but
but even who was working over there, you know, for him to
Yeah.
venture into that was that was before he even thought about Natur-Tyme, right? He went from Drummond's Pharmacy to Drummond's Health Shop,
Mhm.
which was obviously just steps away out the back door. You could go out the back door, up the stairs at Drummond's Pharmacy and walk across the parking lot to
Yep.
Drummond's Health Shop.
yeah, it was, so I could work both organizations.
That's true.
Actually, you know, shorthanded over here.
Yeah, you could go to both.
Yeah, but I did end up managing the shop while he opened the new place and sold the pharmacy.
So then, I mean, I recall him buying Natur-Tyme. So my recollection, and I'm trying to dive deep into really trying to get some more history. I'm in the middle of working on the archives of the Syracuse paper to see if I can really get a timeline, because Natur-Tyme was owned by another family in a little small shop in East Syracuse. I think it maybe was 500, 600, 700 square feet. It was a tiny little thing. I think I was there once.
And I never worked at that location.
But did you ever go in there? No, I've never been over. I have one
No.
picture of that.
He had a fellow who would run back and forth in a little vehicle called the medicine dropper and transfer things back and forth, but also do deliveries to the customer and find out when to get out.
So he had the little beetle, You Ring Me Bring, that because he delivered back in the day. That was ahead of his time to where we are now, you know, people stopped delivering. But so it was owned by a family, then he bought that and operated it for, I think, a short time over in East Syracuse, and he had Drummond's Health Shop. And then, as you mentioned, he ended up selling, you know, the pharmacy to Henry Panache, Faze, then became Eckerd's, then became, you know, now it's a Walgreens.
Okay.
I actually went over there the other day,
Yeah.
and I just stepped in there, and it
Was it nostalgic?
I thought I would be, it was the 20th anniversary of my dad's passing, and I was drawn to drive over there, and I thought that I would feel his spirit, you know, and I just felt drawn to go over there, and it wasn't there. And it was very, very interesting. They'd taken over Swanson Cleaners,
Mhm.
so they had taken that space, and the back was all configured different. It was all kind of behind all these gates, and it wasn't open, the pharmacy part. So I stopped somebody and I said, the pharmacy's not open. She said, no, it's closed on the weekends. I said, what? And she said, there's not enough pharmacists to keep it open on the weekends. And I was just, you know, sad and flabbergasted and just surprised that that's, you know, where the world, we all know retail's, you know, definitely in a new place, but I was surprised on that one. So no, his spirit wasn't there, but it took me back, you know, because it had evolved. You know, when I was young, it was in a different location when he and my grandfather started it, and there was a gas station there and Mr. John's Hair's there.
Yes.
The liquor store was there. My dad was there, the Swanson Cleaners, and PNC. And then they reconfigured the whole thing when I was probably in my early teens or something. And it was a brand new store. And I remember that opening, and we scooped ice cream. I scooped ice cream. He had a humidor thing with cigars in the corner.
That I remember.
I mean, you know,
I didn't remember the ice cream. though.
yeah, oh yeah, that's how I started, was scooping ice cream. And then he taught me how to make change at the cash register. Because those registers didn't do what they
No.
do now.
You counted it.
You had to count up to the quarter.
If I don't cashier any longer, but if I did, I would still count it back.
I had to count it back, and you had to count up to the nearest 25, and, you know, he taught us all how to count change. But, so I do, again, living in Houston, I remember Drummond's Health Shop. I do remember, you know, that he bought Natur-Tyme, and then he closed that and moved over to Charles Ave to be closer to Dr. Rogers.
There are still people who are upset that we're on the east side.
Yeah, yes. So
enjoy this.
well, yes. I remember, I think I moved back here in 1999, and he just was closing Drummond's Health Shop, maybe that year or the year before. So did you automatically go over to
I took a minute.
Charles Ave?
I took a minute, yeah. I did a little exploring to see if there was, I was considering moving to Vermont actually, so. Took a vacation week and went up there and looked around, a lot of health food stores.
Yeah, really, that would be the
No
place to go.
No stands, no. Didn't meet a single stand, did get a lot of really good ideas, but did not meet a single stand.
So you stayed at Drummond's Health Shop till he closed and then you moved over to Charles Ave?
Yes.
I don't know when I popped into your life, from how long you were over at Charles Ave in Natur-Tyme before I showed up.
Ooh, I couldn't tell you that.
Not too long, was it?
No, I don't think terribly.
Yeah, maybe a year or two, something like that. So, and then obviously I came in, the evolution occurred, but you know, I knew nothing when I walked into Natur-Tyme to start my journey. I always tell people, all I knew was my dad was doing some wild and crazy things.
Mhm.
And every once in a while, if I had a health issue, a box would show up on my doorstep in Texas with some foreign concept, a B vitamin, a C vitamin, a this or that. And nobody knew what the heck that stuff was, you know. So I remember when I decided to move back here and get involved in the business, you know, my life had changed. I had 2 young sons and decided to move back home. I'd been gone 20 years. And I said, how do I even begin this? And he sent me Dr. Earl Mendel's Vitamin Bible. And he said, read this book and learn one thing, like B vitamins, energy, C, immune. And he goes, that's E, antioxidant. And, you know, and that was the rudimentary introduction that I had.
It's still a great.
It still is a great book.
Still holds up.
So how did you take on all of that massive learning? I know, you know, you went from his little aisle in Drummond's Pharmacy to Drummond's Health Shop, then to a much higher profile and a much bigger footprint to Charles Ave.
It was a little bit at a time and a customer at a time and a health issue at a time. I had my own health issues. Customers would come in with a thing that I did not quite know how to deal with yet, or I just knew enough to know that I didn't know enough.
Yeah.
I've never been one to like overstep. I don't want to say, oh, it does this thing, it doesn't do that thing. And I always like to acknowledge our differences. But yeah, a little bit at a time. We still have one very challenging customer. Initially, it was not mutual love. Everybody would see her coming up. And one day I said to her, there's a learning curve. You've majored in you. I'm doing the best I can. And we've gotten along famously ever since because she continues to educate me and I continue.
Well,
that's true of a lot.
Right. Well, look at the world today with, you know, Dr. Google, you know, I mean, there's pros and cons to that. I was going to say to you, the prescription, Dr. Box, the prescription for nutritional healing was the Bible. You know, it sat out on a rack and customers and us and you would walk over, look up the nutrient or look up the condition and see what he wrote about it, along with a lot of other reference books, because you didn't have the internet back then to put in anything and, you know, massive amounts of information, which again, pros and cons to what you're seeing today. So one of my questions was, from back then, when you had one book or you needed to research and you didn't have the internet, to today's plethora of everybody being their own doctor. Pros, cons, good, bad, like it better that way, this way.
I love that people are engaged in their own health.
Exactly.
That is the vital aspect of all of this, is that if you're looking to someone to fix your life for you, fix your health for you, it'll only go so far. It'll only take you so far. You have to have sort of a visual of what's going on and be able to make milestones for yourself and listen to your body. So the fact that there's so much information out there, some of it factual and some not, is at least engaging people in their own health and well-being and letting them know that there is a potential, because as a society, we're very quick to say, well, there's no cure. And I think the phrase should be, there's no known cure. And the literal translation of that is, I don't know. And as long as you can admit that you don't know, then you're still seeking. And I think that people seeking on their own is wonderful. I think people coming to me to help with that search is wonderful. Coming to Natur-Tyme to just see what's available and then going home and doing their own research on. I love that. I absolutely love that.
Well, I think you said it perfectly in what was in my head. I mean, you know, I think of my mother when I had health issues as a child. The doctor was revered in God, and whatever he said, she never questioned, though her mother's intuition did kick in a few times. And I always likened her to Shirley MacLaine in terms of endearment, a few times with some doctors, but you know, they knew what they knew and you didn't question. And certainly we've evolved, and the, you know, whole medical model has changed. And, you know, you have to be your own advocate, and a doctor needs you to be your own advocate. You have to come in prepared, your questions, you know, you and I have talked about, and I've talked about for years on the radio, you know, you can't go in and lie to your doctor and not tell him what you're taking or what you're doing, because you only harm yourself. And that's not a good relationship to have with somebody you need to trust and have a good relationship with, you know, for your own health
But
and
that is an
safety.
instinct. It is an instinct to say, well, everything's good, everything's good. You know, so having if you have an advocate who can go along with you and say, what about that thing you were complaining about yesterday? That would be great.
Right.
But better to advocate for yourself.
Well, I think the medical community, you know, I remember starting, you know, when my dad started Nutritional Insights and we were on the radio, you know, 20 plus years ago now. We were on for 12 years and we've been off for 10, so over 20 years ago, you know, I followed Doctor on Call. So all the doctors were on before, you know, and they would rotate. I'd come into the studio and, you know, they'd be talking and a caller would call if it was an orthopedic. What do you think about glucosamine? And the doctor would sneer and, you know, and then be a cardiologist, and somebody would call it about fish oil, and the doctor would sneer, and I'd be sitting there waiting to go in, and they'd look at me through the glass, and I just, you know, some I knew, some I didn't. But then you noticed over, you know, the 10, 12 years, there was a subtle shift happening, and they weren't poo-pooing and they weren't sneering. And, you know, there was a little bit more acceptance, not on everything. And I never expected, you know, it to be on everything, but there was a little bit more, you know, it can't hurt you, you know, if that's what you want to do type of thing. So, you know, it certainly evolved, and now we're, you know, where we are today. I'm sure if you talk to most doctors in any specialty, they're taking some type of supplement, and most of their patients are. Now, how invested they are in learning about them, you know, or being connected to, I'm not so sure, but, you know, it's definitely mainstream from when you started back in the 80s in terms of how many people were taking supplements.
We had some doctors who sent people in for nutrients, besides Jerry Rogers. There were other physicians, but it was not the mainstay, I wouldn't say.
Right. So what do you see today as the biggest challenges, aside from the world today, which of course has evolved, you know, over the past couple of years with what we're all living with, but just in terms of customers coming in and, you know, what they're seeking, you know, is it more because they're aging and their joints are hurting and they're noticing some changes, or are they more proactive, being reactive? I'm catching you just off the fly to just kind of see what changes you might have seen today from 20 years ago, or are they identical? People are people.
I am seeing more proactive, and I am seeing people who are more engaged in their own personal journey, and not, I have people who come up and say, which one do I take? And that is a huge question to ask, and a huge abdication. And really, there's always going to be a back and forth. A conversation needs to take place. There are no pat answers. This is good for absolutely everybody. This is bad for absolutely everybody. We can put that. There are no hard and fast rules. We are all different. People are beginning to realize that their particular situation is not identical to diagnosis. And there's a confluence of diagnoses. And so people are trying to stave off what they perceive as a freight train towards their genetic predispositions. I'm constantly reminding people that there are genetic propensities and cultural propensities, that if you have similar illnesses to your parents and you live your life as your parents did, your diet is the same as your parents was, you're likely to encounter a lot of the same health issues. Yes, but we are also responsible for the gene pool that follows us. So any advancements that we make in our own personal health changes their genetic outlook.
Interesting. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So we can still strengthen the gene pool by living a more healthy lifestyle. And
yeah, it's interesting. I ran, this was years ago, I ran into, you know, a friend in Wegmans, and her sister had been diagnosed with, or she had just been diagnosed with breast cancer. but her sister and her aunt and her mother. And she made a comment and I walked away. She said, I was just waiting for my turn, you know, and I walked away and, you know, with empathy and, you know, my heart, but it's like, it just stuck with me. What an interesting life to live your life, just anticipating, waiting for what she thought was going to happen because her aunt, her sister, and her mother had breast cancer. So, you know, obviously, I don't know whether she had the ability, you know, a lot of people are more proactive today. You can do genetic testing. It's amazing what you can find out now, which is scary and also empowering at the same time. So, but it always stuck with me that she just felt that was her destiny and just waiting for her time.
That is sad.
You know, so I don't know. So I'm just curious, I'm gonna go backwards as we're sitting here in front of this guy, who, I don't know, he must have been in his late 20s, I'm gonna guess, maybe, or early 30s.
I don't remember those watches.
Oh, I do. I mean, this was the original Drumlin's pharmacy before it moved into the one that you worked in. But, you know, a man ahead of his time, as we said, and he was always, what do you think he'd think of where we are today? You know, clearly we lost him 66 and vibrant, and Lord only knows what he was still capable of doing. What do you think he would think about today?
Oh my goodness.
I'm gonna put you on the spot on that, but I'm curious.
He'd be very proud of you. And I think he'd be very enthusiastic about the events. It's been kind of painful, I know, having to put those on hold,
Right.
Over COVID, but I think that he would have been probably had his hand in that too, you know?
Well, I do remember him coming to some of the first ones in the Art and Home Center building. I don't know, maybe one or two, and just, you know, being proud and awe, you know, of what we did, and then obviously we took it to different levels. But I do appreciate that. I think that he would have enjoyed that. But I hear him yelling in my ear sometimes. What are you doing? What are you thinking? Not in a bad way, you know, just kind of like on my shoulder, whether it's the devil or the angel on my shoulder, you know, with all the challenges that are out there today, you know, to try to keep a business going and, you know, all of the challenges. So, but I think to all of the things that he had to go through, you know, from my grandfather. Did you ever work with my grandfather?
No.
So he was already in Florida by the time you came.
I need to come up and visit and try to put a day in.
Yeah, behind the counter.
Yeah.
How'd that go?
It's a little friction.
Yes, yes.
As I recall.
So I can imagine, but my father always said, and I try to remember, you know, my grandfather came from Russia to New York, became a pharmacist, came here and started working for what was a chain pharmacy, and then eventually ventured on his own, and then put my dad in business. And my father always said, you know, he took it to the next step from my grandfather, and then I was taking it from the next step from him, and you know how the generations evolve and grow. And of course, there's no next generation to come in and take over, but and the world is so different, you know, Instagram, TikTok, social media, internet, web, you know, the world is so different. I don't know what he would think just from when he passed in 2002 to 20 years later, the massive changes that have occurred.
Absolutely. Things are almost available like this.
Like that.
But he always was the personal touch. People could have gone up to Carl's Drugs and had their prescription filled, but they needed the information on what, and I'm not bad mouthing Carl's at all. They needed the information about what else they could do, what it would conflict with, and what else they could do. And he would just drop that. Even if they didn't know they needed it, he would drop it in their ear. You know, if you were to take up walking a couple miles a day, that would probably be a thing of the past. You know, that sort of a.
I just remember him running out into the parking lot after customers, if they came by, if they came in looking for something and they didn't leave with anything, he'd run out to the parking lot. What can we help you with? What can we help you with? And they say, oh, I want purple polka dotted toothpaste. I'll get it for you. And the next day there'd be 40 boxes of purple polka dotted toothpaste.
Somebody in town wanted doll heads. Apparently they were into crocheting and they wanted, and so he had an aisle that was half made up of doll heads.
Can you imagine? I mean, we love him and we say this with just love and admiration, but I mean,
the guy who got it for him.
And
he didn't have it, he was gonna be the guy.
And then he'd have 4,000 of them just in case another person walked in who wanted doll heads or purple polka dotted toothpaste. I sort of wrangled that in when I came in, you know, the next generation wasn't chasing people out to the parking lot. But I think what instilled in you being with the family for 36 years and some other people that would been with us for decades as well, that commitment to customer service. I mean, I don't know where that came from, if it was my grandfather to him or just he knew that was the foundation of everything he did, was the commitment to customer service. And that is something you have epitomized
Thank you.
for 35 plus years. And I'm so grateful, eternally grateful, for that commitment to carry on, to carry on that commitment that he instilled in you 36 years ago as a young teenager to today.
For a long time. And yeah. And I remember him saying one time, he was afraid that a customer had been neglected, and he said, "You ask them if she needs help?" And I said, "Of course." And he said, "You never ask them if they need help. Nobody wants to if they need help." She's been attended to.
Yes.
She'll call me if she needs me.
Yes, he did have that. That was not a question that you
It
wanted.
was like, gotcha. Yeah.
It was, but I want to thank you so much. I enjoyed this time. I think I'm at a stage in life that, you know, looking back and trying to understand the building blocks of the family and the dynamics and the history, is, you know, I'm at that phase of life. And so you and I had a chat a couple of weeks ago, and I said, I'd just love to hear a little bit more about how you ended up here and how the steps were taken, you know, for you to kind of come along with the wave of
And I
what
want
we
to hear what the
started.
research tells you going through the archives.
I'm hoping to see what I can find. I don't know what's documented in the Syracuse paper. And, you know, like I said, I asked my aunt some questions about my grandfather just to kind of get an understanding of how he ended up in Syracuse, you know, and how that evolved. And then obviously I knew he put my dad, you know, in business. So here we are today, but you are a treasure to all of us that work with you every day, and most importantly, to the customers in the community here in Syracuse. And I am
I love
grateful.
my people, and I love you.
Thank you.